Hello and welcome. With just one more sleep till election day, we have the almost Labour leader, John McDonnell, the actual Lib Dem leader, Jo Swinson, the real queen of the screen, Anushka Asthana, Theresa May's most loyal lieutenant, who now waves the flag for Johnson, Brandon Lewis, and in our Parliament that never sleeps, the Tory John Whittingdale, Labour's Rosie Duffield, and Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price. Watcher. Now, in the end, it does all come down to trust. Do you trust him to take us out of the EU at the end of January and then negotiate a new relationship with the European Union at breakneck speed by the end of 2020 without damaging our incomes and our security? Or are you looking to him to give you another referendum on whether we leave the EU? And do you trust him to tax and spend on benefits and to improve public services on a scale we've almost never seen in this country and without ultimately leaving the nation poorer? As for our guest, Jo Swinson, do you trust that she can deliver her pledge to keep us in the European Union if she's also saying she could never support Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister? And then there's the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon. There wouldn't have been a general election if her MPs hadn't pressed for one, and yet that election could make Boris Johnson stronger, facilitate the Brexit she hates, and block the referendum on Scottish independence she so badly wants. As I said, it's all about trust. So, who do you trust, Anushka?
I only trust you. Well, you and my mum and dad.
Oh, I love you.
Now, at the beginning of this election, I remember speaking to Labour activists who were really worrying about how it would all be framed. They felt that if it was a Brexit election, that would be good news for the Tories and maybe for the Lib Dems. But if it was all about the NHS, they thought that would be better news for them. Well, Loughborough University have been tracking what dominates in media coverage week by week, and it is very interesting. We focus just on issues rather than stories about who's up or who's down. Now, this is week one, beginning early in November, and this is Brexit, top of the list, 16% of all coverage, followed by the economy, the NHS, security and public services. If we go into week two, that stayed at the top of the list. The top three were the same, but tax and immigration came in. Week three, Brexit, top of the list. Again, good for the Tories. I love this screaming emoji here. That's standards, corruption, scandals and sleaze. So questions of trust, like Robert was talking about, beginning to rise up the agenda. Now, watch this. If we go into week four, that's last week, Brexit plummets. It goes down to fifth place. It's gone from 16% of all coverage to just 6.7%, with the economy at the top and the NHS in second place. Now, this is media coverage, but does it tell us what is actually cutting through with voters? Over the weekend, Lord Ashcroft repeated some polling on what stories people are actually noticing. And I don't want to depress us all, but top of the list is none of them. 40% said nothing, followed in second place by politicians' lies. After that, we've got nurses and NHS policy, anti-Semitism. As for Brexit, well, look at this. It's tiny, just 3%. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. Absolutely startling stuff. John, do you think Brexit is just off people's minds? They're just bored sick with it?
No, I don't. I think there may be a bit of election fatigue setting in, which is hardly surprising. But in terms of the issues that matter in this election, it is about Brexit. Because
well, it is for you, but what about when you bang on doors?
Well, actually, I've found that it is certainly easily the top issue that is raised. But actually, everything else depends upon Brexit. Of course, people are concerned about the NHS and about public services. But unless we can sort out Brexit, we can't concentrate on these other issues. Now, and that's been the story for the last 3 years.
Now, what I want to ask, particularly you and Rosie, is what in the end would you settle for as a result? Any kind of majority? A majority of one, is that enough?
Well, I want, in the famous phrase, to get Brexit done. Only a Conservative majority government can achieve that. It's only
Well, Boris Johnson has constantly been saying recently only a majority of one will do it is good enough in that sense. So is it good enough?
Well, if everybody voted in favour of the deal, then yes, it would get Brexit done. But a majority of one is very insecure. They usually don't last for the duration of a full parliament. You do need to have a decent working majority in order to
But what do you think decent is in that?
Well, I mean, you can't put a figure on it. I will be...
But what do you think? I mean, so Theresa May wasn't satisfied with a majority of 17. She went to the country, so you would assume, you would probably think 17 is too low, is that right?
If we have a majority of 17 which allows us to get Brexit through, then I will be happy. I will obviously be happier still if the majority is larger.
Rosie, what's a good outcome for Labour? There are no polls which are showing you as being the largest party, so what would you settle for?
Well, I would love that. Obviously, we need a Labour government and we need to sort of address all the issues of austerity for the last 10 years, and I would love that. But anything that helps... Well, anything that helps to get a coalition to force a people's vote over the line is fine by me at the moment, because that's my ultimate goal.
So just to be clear, for you, a decent result is broadly a result that keeps Boris Johnson out of number 10, and more or less anybody who gives you a referendum is good enough.
That's the way that I would like to see things if we can't get a Labour majority.
I mean, Adam, I think you would broadly agree with Rosie that what you would like is a hung parliament that puts somebody into 10 Downing Street who would back a referendum. That is Plaid Cymru policy. What would you say to my next guest, Jo Swinson, who disagrees with you, because you've said that in those circumstances you would support Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. She won't, so try and persuade her.
Well, you know, what we've said is, look, we're less interested in personalities than we are in policies. And yes, I mean, the best case scenario for Wales and ergo for Plaid Cymru is a hung parliament where we have, you know, the maximum number, the greatest number of Plaid Cymru, Party of Wales MPs elected ever. That gives us maximal influence in that context. And, you know, I mean, it's interesting, what I've seen in this election campaign, that people are very engaged. So the opinion poll is saying that people think this is a very important election, but the don't knows, even on election eve, you know, we've never seen the level of people, the amount of people that don't know which way they're going to go, because traditional Labour voters are pretty uninspired by Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of people don't trust the Prime Minister. What are they going to do? And obviously we, you know, in Wales, we can provide them with an alternative, with a third option. And that's what we're seeing.
OK,
a lot of those Labour voters...
But that's Wales, Adam. But realistically, for the UK, there really are only two choices. One is Boris Johnson leading a majority government. The other is, and all the polls seem to indicate this, and it's still an option, a hung parliament in which Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader of a minority government. So what would you say, as I say, to Jo Swinson, to persuade her that the Lib Dems in those circumstances ought to back Jeremy Corbyn, since you've said you would?
I'm not in the business of persuading Jo to do anything. I mean, I'm still trying to persuade voters back home in Wales. I mean, that's the principal thing. Look, I mean, there's a huge historic opportunity for our party in particular, because, you know, the Labour Party, the best way I can describe it, you've lost the British Legion vote. So those traditional Labour working-class voters, they feel politically homeless like never before. And I'm hoping they're going to come find a new home with us.
So guess what? One of the things I'm going to come back to you to talk about in a minute is your proposed legislation to make lying by MPs illegal, but there ought perhaps be a law that says answering the question ought to be compulsory, which I don't think you did there. But anyway, delighted now to be joined by Jo Swinson, Lib Dem leader. Jo, I do want to follow up, though, on what I was talking to Adam about. Your big pitch is that Brexit is wrong. You went into the election saying that, you know, in the unlikely event that you formed a government, you would revoke Article 50, but you're now broadly in the position where you recognise that a referendum is the most likely outcome. But given that you've also said you could not possibly support Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, why would anybody voting Lib Dem think that would lead to a referendum?
Well, it can. We have
but what's the mechanism? What people want to know, if they don't, you know, to persuade them that their vote for the Lib Dems is not wasted, is what is the route that gets you from a Lib Dem vote to a referendum if you will block Jeremy Corbyn as PM?
Look, let me just first of all set out why we want to remain in the EU. those of us who voted Remain and woke up on that day, on the 24th of June 2016, having seen that vote, it wasn't a sense of distress at some kind of, EU institution. It was a feeling that our very liberal values as a country were under attack, who we are as a country. And so this is about those values, about being an inclusive, open society where everyone is respected. And the problem with Jeremy Corbyn is not only that he says he'll be neutral on Brexit, it is that he has singularly failed to deal with this issue of anti-Semitism in his party, right? Just at the weekend, we saw horrific details of this in the Sunday Times, of the Labour member who had been posting about gassing Jews, and Labour took 8 months to expel him from the party. When Alistair Campbell voted Lib Dem, they expelled him in 2 days, right? Just look at that contrast there. Jeremy Corbyn is not taking that seriously. It's a fundamental issue of values of equality and human rights. And that is why I stand by my position that
obviously
Jeremy Corbyn is not fit to be
many
Prime
people,
Minister.
as you say, it's a fundamental issue. But for many people voting in this election, stopping Brexit is their priority, and the polls seem to indicate that they are gravitating to Labour because they have more confidence that a vote for Labour will deliver that referendum than they do that the Lib Dems will deliver that referendum.
I don't think you can divide your values like that and say that you want to support the EU in terms of human rights, but you're prepared to tolerate someone who is so relaxed about anti-Semitism. But I do recognise, look, there's plenty of people in the Labour Party who are appalled at Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on these issues. So if we're in a scenario where there is no overall majority, where for the second time Jeremy Corbyn has failed to win a majority, it is entirely feasible that he may no longer be leader of the Labour Party. We should also be looking at other, inventive and creative solutions to bring together people in Parliament who support a people's vote. Because if you look at what we've done over the last 2 years, we have worked constructively across multiple party lines. So, I've worked with, Adam's colleagues in Plaid Cymru, with Rosie and many of her colleagues in the Labour Party, with people in the Conservative Party, some of whom have now been kicked out. And we have twice stopped Brexit. So we will continue to work in a collaborative way.
No, and I understand that you want to be collaborative, but many people would say, look, the person who may or may not take over from Jeremy Corbyn is likely to be somebody who was in a shadow cabinet at a time that the Labour Party took, in many people's view, far too long to deal with anti-Semitism. So why would you...
Still haven't dealt with it.
Why would you throw your weight behind that leader rather than Corbyn himself?
I'm not throwing my weight behind anybody.
I know you're not,
right?
but what I'm saying is...
But
people won't trust you unless you are prepared to say you could support a Labour minority government, because there is no other... there's no other route to delivering a referendum.
I've been very clear. Liberal Democrat votes will never put Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. But I will work in a cooperative way with people who share my values, with people who share our goals and our objectives. Now, I don't know what the outcome will be for the Labour Party and what direction they will go in next, but the more Liberal Democrat MPs there are in Parliament, the more likely it is that we can assemble a majority of MPs in Parliament to pass legislation for a people's vote to give people the chance to stop Brexit.
There are some people who would be slightly shocked by what you're saying, because you appear to be saying that a party that will get a reasonably small share of the vote, if the polls are correct, has the right to determine who the next Prime Minister is. That's not democracy, is it?
We have the right to determine who we choose to vote for in Parliament. That's the very question that you're asking me. And I'm being very straightforward when I say who I'm not prepared to support, and also that we will work in a cooperative way with people to stop Brexit. And I think actually there's many people in this country that is the outcome they want to see. But to do that, the first thing people need to make sure happens is that Boris Johnson does not get the majority that he craves. And there is still time to stop him. We've seen from the very recent polling, there are many seats that are still in play, and how handfuls of voters in those different constituencies decide to vote could change that outcome. And bluntly, if people are sitting at home and they've got a massive pile of Lib Dem leaflets that have come through the door and are sitting on the kitchen table, then, that's a seat that Lib Dems can win, and that their vote can make the difference.
So before the election was called, you were riding at a lot higher place in terms of the opinion polls. You've come back quite a long way. What's a good result for the Lib Dems?
Well, we want to stop Brexit. So, obviously...
So any number of Liberal Democrat MPs that can block Brexit, that's enough for you?
I want as many Liberal Democrat MPs as possible, because we're a party that is about looking to the future on a whole host of things, from the climate emergency to dealing with mental health to investing in our children's future. But, of course, the immediate challenge our country faces is how do we resolve the Brexit impasse. We're very clear. Remaining in the EU is better for our jobs, it's better for our NHS, it's better for our security. And so we want a result that enables us to remain in the EU. And that is the immediate question that people are considering in the next day.
So the YouGov poll last night predicted 15 Lib Dem MPs. Is that enough?
Look, obviously the full arithmetic of the election will become clear in a small number of hours.
Would you regard that as a success? It's obviously 3 more than last time.
I want as many Lib Dem MPs as possible. You'll not be astonished that I'm not going to sit here the day before the election and put lots of numbers on this. But I've been touring the country and we have amazing candidates in seats, and including in seats where, yes, seats Lib Dems have done well in before, but the seats where we are on the cusp of toppling Tory majorities of upwards of 20,000. That's how much things are being changed by Brexit and by Boris Johnson, who, as a leader, has gone so close to Nigel Farage, who is, seemingly happy to be endorsed by Tommy Robinson. I mean, it's not just people who have been, long-standing Lib Dems that are appalled by that. There's plenty of Conservatives who are appalled by that
Now, I do want to talk about one or two other of your policies. I mean, unlike the Brexit Party, you do have a proper manifesto. One policy that has upset quite a lot of women is your very liberal approach to transgender and the fact that you are in favour of self-declaring. So I could declare myself to be a woman and you would respect that. And indeed, if you declared yourself to be a man, I under a Lib Dem policy, would have to respect that. It's alienated lots of women. Do you regret having gone that route?
Absolutely not. There are thousands of people in our country who identify in a different gender to the one they were born in, or perhaps do not identify in either binary gender. And 1 in 4 of those young people in our country who are trans have attempted suicide. This is a serious issue of discrimination, and it's important that we protect that community. Now, there already is self-declaration for the vast majority of circumstances. The only change is actually about birth certificates. And so a lot of the stories that I've read about this, I recognise there will be some people with genuine concerns, but a lot of the stories that I've read about this are frankly sensationalist and come from a place of prejudice.
But why do you think some very serious feminists are so angry with you?
Well, I mean, I consider myself to be a feminist, and I don't think that there is any contradiction. In fact, I don't think that, you cannot ignore all of the different equality strands. You can't sort of have some kind of hierarchy. I don't think how you can be a feminist without recognising that Black and Muslim women face specific discrimination, additional discrimination. And the same as low-income women would similarly, and the same is true for trans women.
One final question, because we are unfortunately out of time. Do you understand why there are some people who've been uncomfortable that your party took £100,000 from Ferring Pharmaceuticals, which makes drugs that delay puberty for young people who are thinking about the whole gender issue?
Look, I mean, we've had our policy on this is long-standing. It goes back years, long before a donation from a long-standing Liberal Democrat supporter.
But you'll understand that this whole issue of blocking puberty is one that is hugely controversial.
And of course, it should never, ever be done lightly. And these are decisions to be taken, in medical circumstances where, it's looking at the individual case. And, it's doctors working with parents and individuals themselves who are best placed to come to the right answers, not other people sitting elsewhere passing judgment on that.
Jo, so lovely to see you. Enjoy the last few hours, if that's the right thing to wish you.
Good morning leaflets tomorrow, bright and early.
Great to see you, and see you again soon, I hope. Quite a lot to pick up there. Rosie, in your seat, you are sort of benefiting, as I understand it, from a sort of unofficial pact with some Lib Dems.
Yeah.
We can't actually talk, obviously, about the circumstances of your own seat, but do you think nationally there's been a bit of laying down of arms despite leadership?
Yeah, I think the British public are sick of this partisan tribal approach every time, and they want us to come together on issues. I'm a member of More United, and we talk about policy. That's people from all different parties trying to get a policy. So for the NHS, and looking at it for longer than 5-year stretches, the climate emergency, it's coming together and being grown up about politics. And I think in my seat, that's particularly prevalent. And I have had a coalition of support from other parties.
I mean, this must be something of concern to you, John, that actually, and, opinion polls can't really pick this up. We may be seeing more tactical voting in a sense at the grassroots that is not being led by party leaders.
Well, I think the choice is very clear because you have one party, which is the Conservative Party, that wants to deliver Brexit, and then you have all the other parties that don't. And Jo Swinson has made it clear that that's her first priority, and so there is no way in which the Liberal Democrats would ever support a Conservative government. So it is plain that voting Liberal Democrat is a support for a Labour government. So it is a very clear choice.
Do you think, Adam, there should have been more sort of official deals between the parties? Do you think the Labour Party made a mistake by refusing to stand down in seats that it couldn't possibly win in return for support from some of the other pro-Remain parties?
The Brecon and Radnor by-election was the first outing, wasn't it? I think of the Remain alliance between Plaid Cymru, the Green Party, and the Liberal Democrats. And I asked the Labour leader in Wales, look, we made the principled decision not to stand. To work with the other pro-Remain parties. Why won't Labour do it? And back came the answer: Labour doesn't do pacts. And unfortunately, there is at the heart of the Labour Party a kind of a deep, hard tribalism, which finds it very difficult. There are individual Labour politicians that take a different and more cooperative approach, but the Labour Party, unfortunately, seems to exist purely and simply in order to deliver power to the Labour Party. And, as a pluralist, I think that's a bad thing for politics. And I wish the Labour Party would have listened to its better angels.
Well, I'm going to be talking to one of those leaders, John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor now. What about this issue about whether the days of tribalism should be over? Big issues facing the country, Brexit being one of them. None of the polls are showing you heading for a majority. So why not do more alliances with other parties to keep Boris Johnson out?
It's not tribalism, it's principle. We believe in the way in which we want society changed. We're socialists. So we adhere to those principles. And in elections, people want to be able to vote for a Labour Party with that programme of change. Simple as that. Even
in constituencies where there is not the remotest chance of you ever winning?
I think it is a matter of principle. And also I think the electorate, members of the electorate don't like sort of stitch-ups and deals before elections. I think they want parties to stand on the basis of the way in which their ideas about how they want society to be managed and organised and changed. And I think it is a matter of
So you don't even tonight want to give a nod to Labour sympathisers who are in constituencies where another Remain party or another non-Tory party might win? You don't even want to give a nod to them that they should vote for the Liberal Democrats or...
I'll always urge people to vote Labour, full stop. But there will be... I've heard in every election I think I've ever stood that there'll be tactical voting. It hasn't happened. There may well be.
But you don't want to encourage it?
No, I'd urge people to vote Labour. I just say to Jo Swinson that actually trying to remove Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, who's been voted twice in overwhelming majorities, might not enamour her to Labour supporters in individual constituencies. Let's put it that way.
We might come back to that, but I want to start actually with the speech you gave about the priorities of Labour for the first 100 days, where, frankly, when I read it, I thought you're broadly saying more or less the whole manifesto is going to be done in the first 100 days, which is obviously not going to happen. No. So what are your real priorities? If you become... Chancellor, what are the things that are absolutely top of your list for the first 100 days?
It's got to be end austerity, number one.
Yeah, but you can end austerity in a whole variety of different ways. So,
well, Robert, let me take you through that. Let me take you through that. That means, yes, the more money for education and the schools rapidly. We have to do that.
So schools, number one.
Well, education is important. NHS is important. We're in an NHS winter crisis that we've never seen on this scale before. We want to get that public money out. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to recognise that there are people out there who have been thrust into real poverty as a result of universal credit, and therefore we have an emergency package to introduce on that very, very quickly. And yes, we do want to introduce the real living wage rapidly. And
so those are the three
biggest
priorities.
But alongside that, let's be clear, we face an existential threat of climate change. So our capital programme, our green industrial revolution, the Green New Deal is absolutely key to us. So we can lay the foundations of that within the first Queen's speech and within our first budget. And the first budget we're looking for in early February.
Now, we've talked about this before. You're acutely aware that poverty is greatest among working households on low wages, including households with children. And child poverty is, some would say, a scandal. So one of the things that I was puzzled by is that although you are putting up benefits and directing money to those people, according to most analyses, you are still several £billion short of actually reversing the cuts that were imposed by the last two governments.
We'll end the benefits freeze and we'll start increasing benefits. We'll make sure, as I say, we have an emergency packet on universal credit. The issue for us is...
But you're still £5 or £6 billion a year short.
We're trying to make sure that we lift people off benefits. That's why a real living wage of £10 an hour is absolutely critical. That's why public sector workers will get an immediate 5% increase in the next pay round as soon as we go in. And that's why, as well, we'll be making sure our trade union reforms establishes trade union rights from day one and proper representation. In that way, we can lift people off benefits. The issue...
But I do want to pick up... We've got to go to the break in just a second. But on that, you promised £58 billion to helping those women born in the 1950s whose pensions were delayed. Now, quite a lot of that money will go to people with, perfectly decent standards of living and incomes. For example, Theresa May, as an example I keep making, will get 30,000 quid from a Labour government.
Yeah, but that will be dealt with by progressive taxation. But the whole issue there, this is not about benefits. This is about entitlements.
Sure, but many people would say that those freezes of benefits, were just as unexpected for that group as the pension delay. So why not...
That's why we're ending the benefits freeze.
Well, except you're not correcting all the losses that those people suffered. I'm just asking about choices. Why didn't you allocate some of that £58 billion to, younger, poorer households?
Because we're ending the benefits freeze. We're scrapping the bedroom tax. We're making sure those on universal credit don't have to wait 5 weeks. All of those will impact upon. We introduce a real living wage.
Yes, you're making a contribution, but as the IFS has pointed out, you are not reversing austerity the impact of austerity in those areas.
With respect to IFS, they're not taking into account the real living wage increases that we're introducing. The issue, there are 4.5 million children out there in poverty in households where someone's at work. Why are they in poverty? Because wages are so low. That's why we're attacking the root cause of that poverty.
I'm only going to interrupt you for a bit because we've got to go to a break. So much more to catch up on with John McDonnell in just a couple of minutes. OK, well, because it's the night before the election, my producers have persuaded me, maybe bullied me is the right word, into doing something very unusual, which is we're turning the tables. And John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, is going to interview me, and I cannot pretend that I'm anything other than very, very nervous. Right, over to you, John.
Welcome on the show.
As always, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
OK, let's talk about your sort of twin roles, which is as an interviewer and commentator, but also as an economist, OK?
Yeah, whatever you like.
In your interviews, who's the best and who's the worst person you've interviewed? Present company accepted.
Right, so there are some politicians who are an absolute nightmare to interview, and I guess...
Go on.
I'm not breaking any particular or revealing any great secrets here, but I mean, Theresa May was always an utter nightmare to interview because, you know, she'd always decided what she was going to say, and she memorised the soundbite, and she repeated it sometimes 5 or 6 times in the course of the interview, and whatever you asked, she gave the same answer. It was very frustrating. And I'm not trying to flatter you, but the truth is, we do like her. I like having you on the show because, you know, even if you occasionally dodge questions, you do it in a way that is normally at least semi-relevant.
Can you hear this? Dodging questions semi-relevantly. Go on.
So, no, I mean, you know, truth, you know, as I say, truthfully, you're a good person to interview because you do try and engage.
Who do you think is not current, past interviewers that you thought?
The Iron Man?
Yeah.
I love Brian Walden. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that really upsets me about the modern world of television is none of us are ever given long enough now to actually explore issues. You know, if you remember, he had he would have a half an hour, an hour. I mean, you know, and you could actually get into one of the things that's depressed me, if I'm honest, about this general election campaign. Massive issues to do with your economic policy, with the nature of Brexit. The quality of debate has been, on the whole, really low, really superficial.
But Walden had a political background as well, didn't he?
He did. He knew what he was talking about.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, which was one of the reasons. You know, the other person who I also slightly admire, because he was so disarming, was Frost. Because Frost sounded like a patsy, but actually, people relaxed, and then they told him things they should never have told him. He was a rather. I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah.
So, what's your last question? You got a last question, Brendan?
On the economy, what's your view about the economy over the next 18 months?
It depends on what happens. It depends on, you know, whether we leave the EU. It depends on what kind of stimulus there is. I mean, you know as well as I do that the uncertainties are huge.
Who would you appoint as the Governor of the Bank of England?
We got to go.
Apparently we're out of time. Welcome back. In just a minute, I'll be back with the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. But first, here's Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. Now, I've got what can only be described as some magnificent geekery from Chris Cook at Tortoise. Now, this looks more complicated than it is. All these dots are constituencies. Anything above the line are those that voted Leave, with the most Brexity at the top. Anything below the line are Remain. The Tory seats are on the left and the opposition seats are on the right, with Labour in red. The further you get from the middle, the safer the seats. So these in the middle are the interesting marginal seats. 2 weeks ago, we had the first big YouGov MRP poll that suggested a 68 majority for the Tories, and these were the seats that it suggested would change hands. If you look at this patch here, marginal Labour Leave seats that it suggested would go blue. That's what people talk about when they're suggesting the red wall might fall. So if this is the battleground, you might expect the Prime Minister and Corbyn to be going to these seats. But when Chris looked at where Johnson and Corbyn had gone over 2 weeks, it didn't quite tally. Have a look at this. OK, so Johnson is in green, Corbyn in pink, and you can see there's not much action at all in that area that people were saying was the battleground, which leads the question to whether they knew that something was going on that we didn't. And the truth is that maybe they did, because we've now had a new MRP poll, and as we know, it's tightened. Now the majority we're looking at is 28, and if you look at it, yep, some of those seats do still go blue, but you can see the Tories have to defend seats here to the Lib Dems, to the SNP, and some to Labour. That might explain why Boris Johnson has been going to different places. For this, Chris Cook is our Geek of the Week. Geek of the Week. Robert.
Hey, a journalist gets Geek of the Week. That's a new one. John, so much to pick up with you on, but just on the sort of tone of the campaigns, in order for you to do well, you've got to persuade all sorts of sympathisers to vote for you. There are still you know, quite a number of your supporters who are spending the campaign denigrating previous Labour governments, previous Labour Prime Ministers like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. I mean, that's never going to help you win a majority, is it?
No. I think that's less now than ever before. I think there's an element of emphasising the positives of the New Labour period of office. You know, one of our big policy successes under New Labour was the Sure Start centres, and that's one of our big campaigns. We're going to reinstate them. You know, something like 1,000 that have been shut. We're going to reinstate them. So I think.
So would you encourage some of your colleagues just to bury the hatchet and
I think we have largely. I think we have. I think we've moved on. I think particularly in individual policy areas. The big difference, as you know, was Iraq. That was it. We understand that. But if you look at domestic policy, on those domestic policies back, Gordon Brown, what he did on lifting children out of time of poverty was terrific. The investment in the NHS during New Labour was up to 6%. Now we're putting in over 4.5% virtually, but was on below just above 1% for a whole series of years under the Tories. No wonder we've got an NHS crisis. So that investment in public services was critical under New Labour.
Why do you think, I mean, you know, we obviously don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but it is very clear from your own MPs who I speak to that a lot of white, particularly working class men, 40 plus, feel very alienated from Labour. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of that category. I don't want to. Actually, I don't think we should create myths here, but there's a lot of people out there.
Well, it's what your own MPs, or candidates,
no,
excuse me, I'll say.
I understand that, but we shouldn't create myths here. There's a lot of disillusionment with politics overall. There's a lot of people after 10 years of austerity feel as though actually politics doesn't work for them, and I understand that. I completely understand that. Whole communities have been destroyed over the last 40 years. Others have been left behind. I think what we've got to do is start inspiring people again, giving them confidence that politics can make a difference in their lives.
Just to be clear, would you be happy to be the leader of a middle-class party? Because there's a lot of evidence that, you know, you're a more middle-class party than the Tories now.
I disagree with that completely. This definition of class is quite interesting here because actually the huge amount of support that we've had in recent years has come from young people. People below the age of 35 and onwards. And they're working class kids, a lot of them. In addition to that, look at the support that we've got across the BAME community, largely working class as well. So this definition of class, I think, is out of date and needs to move on. But that doesn't mean to say you don't ignore the breadth of our society and that you do actually recognise there are some who actually do feel they've been left out, that they've been ignored and not listened to. That's part of the process that we've been going through in recent years.
Now, finally, unfortunately, we are almost out of time. If it doesn't go as well as you might like tomorrow night, how long would you be happy to be interim leader for?
It will be in a majority. It will be, let's be clear, don't pull my leg. We'll have a majority Labour government.
You don't honestly believe... You said that with a straight face. There's no poll which is showing that you're going to get more seats than any other party.
Just rewind a bit, Robert, to 2017, where we were told we'd be wiped out.
Yeah, but you didn't get more seats than the Tories.
No, we didn't, but we came pretty close. And I think if we had another week of campaigning, we'd be in government now. Let's put that properly. Let's put that
So you're
correctly.
saying genuinely, in all seriousness, that you think, even with what you've lost in Scotland, you could actually get more seats than the Tories
I
tomorrow?
still think we could be in a majority position. If we're not, we'll form a minority government and we'll implement our manifesto. No deals, no pacts whatsoever, we'll implement it. But we'd expect those other parties, the smaller minority parties, we'd expect them to be supporting that manifesto. Introduction of real living wage.
Well, they're not going to support everything in the manifesto, so that next time, if you get your wish and you become Chancellor, you'll have to tell me which other policies that you'll drop in order to have the support of the minority parties.
It will be a 5-year programme that I'm sure will be so popular other political parties won't dare to vote against it.
John, as always, a pleasure to see you. As I said to Joe, enjoy the last few hours that we've all got to look forward to. Rosie, do you think it's obviously something that John can't, given his august position, talk about, but do you think that, you know, were it to come to it and Jeremy Corbyn finally had to stand down, that Labour MPs would be happy with John as interim leader?
Sure. I mean, you know, that's the position of the Chancellor, isn't it? The opposition Chancellor.
That is not going to happen.
You're turning down an endorsement from somebody who could be...
you into this. It ain't going to happen.
But, I mean, that's the position of the opposition Chancellor. That's what everyone would expect if Jeremy doesn't take that position. And, you know, we're a party of nearly 600,000 members, and our members choose our leader, ultimately.
Yeah, but I mean, there's an issue about whether or not last time round the leadership election happened too quick, and therefore whether or not it would be more sensible this time to have a period of a few months while the party stabilises and works out what it wants.
Certainly, if we're in a minority government, we'll have to do that, won't we? Yeah, see how the land lies.
Now, in terms of what you've been listening to, John, I mean, one of the things that I think is difficult for voters is that the two parties are offering such radically different visions. I mean, we've got a Labour Party which is proposing, in terms of the speed of it, an increase in public spending, borrowing, taxing, faster than we've actually broadly seen in British history. Now, it's true that it would take it to a level that's sort of comparable with Scandinavia and France, but in fact significantly higher than we've seen for any sustained period in the UK. That is just so different from what your party is offering that for people who aren't ideologues on either side, it's a very difficult choice, isn't it?
Well, in some ways, there is common ground. We all agree that there needs to be more money spent on the NHS, there needs to be more invested into the police services. The difference is that what we are proposing...
Well, there's a £95 billion a year difference.
There is. The difference is we are proposing investment which the nation can afford, and the Labour Party is proposing investment which will bankrupt the country because we cannot afford it. So that is a stark division. But
you want to come back on that at all?
No. Oh, it's ludicrous, isn't
Okay,
it? Absolutely ludicrous. We're going to the level of just about France or Portugal and all the rest of it.
Incredibly rapidly.
We've had 10 years of austerity where they undermined our public services, forced people into poverty and wages have remained...
Unfortunately, I've been told
unfortunately
to go to the break. We've got so much more to talk about. We've got Brandon Lewis of the Tory Party. We're going to talk about Adam Price of Plaid Cymru. So exciting, you won't be able to tear yourself away.
Hello. Welcome to the break, #Peston. I'm joined by our friends because it is the final week of the election and every week we have been doing predictions, OK? Above the line here, Tory majority. In the middle here, we have hung parliament, Tory biggest party Labour and a Labour majority down there. You can go for something else if you like. John, have you done this before?
I can see myself out there.
Do you want to revert, do you want to change that with a day to go?
I hope that it's going to be a majority of 30. I think it's getting quite tight.
Oh.
The opinion polls show margin of error. I'm not going to change my prediction,
20?
but...
Oh, no? OK.
I still think it is...
Rosie?
It's tight.
I don't think that the Tories will get a majority of 30. I think that's really optimistic, and I think we'll be closer than everyone predicts. So I'd say maybe they'll get 15.
Oh, majority, though?
Well, yeah, maximum 15.
Right. OK. A lot of your Labour colleagues were more
Well, it'd be
optimistic.
lovely if we had a
Adam?
Labour majority.
I think it's going to be no overall majority. So,
Who's going to be the biggest party?
I think the Conservatives, yeah. So
and
it's
how
going to be
short?
tight. I think probably 15.
Minus 15. There we go. We have all the predictions ready
Bigger
for
than the
tomorrow.
DUP, anyway.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Welcome back. In just a moment, I'll be speaking with Tory Minister Brandon Lewis. But first, here's Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to very quickly show you an article in the New Statesman, which is an interview with the now former Tory MP and grandee Ken Clarke, in which he's quite critical of Boris Johnson's deal. He basically says that the Prime Minister went into a meeting with Varadkar and bended and folded over and said that he basically didn't understand what it was that he was agreeing to. He called Boris Johnson desperate. Ouch. Robert.
Ouch, Anushka. Yeah, so I'm delighted to be joined by Brandon Lewis. Brandon, are you there?
Evening, how are you doing?
Yeah, never been better. Now, if I could just pick up, actually, with that interview that Ken Clarke gave to the New Statesman, young reporter called Harry Lambert. Ken Clarke says that Boris Johnson, in the end, simply signed up to a customs union for Northern Ireland. He was gulled by Leo Varadkar, he was gulled by the EU. And every time he says it's something different, he's not being quite as straight as he ought to be.
Well, I haven't seen the article. I've not had a chance to read that. But from what you've just outlined to me, Robert, I'm afraid I think Ken's just wrong on this one. This is an agreement that the Prime Minister was able to secure, that people said he couldn't secure. People said they wouldn't open the withdrawal agreement. He got that done. And he achieved what, for many in Parliament, including some in the Labour Party as well, was the key thing they wanted to see, which was getting rid of the backstop.
But why, Brandon, do your normally loyal supporters, the people who actually kept you in office when your friend Theresa May was Prime Minister, why do the DUP say he's talking rubbish and this puts a border down the Irish Sea? I mean, are you saying they don't know what they're talking about?
Well, I respect our friends in the DUP who we've obviously worked with over the last few years, but I think on this one, I just think they are wrong. I think there is not going to be a border down the Irish Sea. We've always been very clear about no border in Northern Ireland and not having a border down the Irish Sea. What this deal does mean is that the people of Northern Ireland will have that self-determination as well going forward. So it ends the backstop, it keeps the whole of the UK together, and the whole of the UK leaves the European Union together.
Now, no campaigns go swimmingly, but you must have cringed when you saw that film of my colleague from ITV, Joe Pike, trying to show the Prime Minister a picture of that poor 4-year-old boy sleeping on the floor of Leeds infirmary and just systematically refusing to look at it. It was a very bad look for Boris Johnson, wasn't it? It looked as though he just didn't want to take responsibility.
Well, nobody wants to see anybody get anything other than the very best possible service in the NHS, and it's bad to see anybody in that kind of situation. But I have to say, the images I saw, it was quite clear the Prime Minister did look at the image.
Right at the end of the interview, having
refused. Hang on,
Brandon.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm saying he looked at the pictures only after he plainly recognised he'd made a terrible mistake in not looking, and for many people, they felt that they saw a Prime Minister who didn't have the empathy that you would expect of somebody in that position.
Well, I have to say that Boris Johnson I've worked with is somebody who does have not just huge empathy, but passion to ensure that people get the very, very best service and care. He wants to see people all over the country getting the very best possible opportunities in life and treatment from the NHS. That's why, one of the reasons why he wants to increase that funding for the NHS and continue to support it and see it improve with more staff and with more hospitals and investments in hospitals as we go forward. Of course, to do all of that, we have got to get a Conservative majority, get Brexit done so we can get onto that domestic agenda.
Now, you say you want a Conservative majority. Is a majority of one enough?
Well, my experience of elections, and in local government, I've seen people win and lose by 3 votes. In fact, on the drawing of cards, every vote matters. A majority of one is a majority, but I hope we will be able to get a good working majority, a reasonable majority that means that we can get Brexit done. All 635 of our candidates are signed up to the deal and will vote for this deal, and a proper Conservative majority is the only way to guarantee we get this done.
What is, in your view, and you're an experienced parliamentarian, what's a good working majority?
Well, anything that allows us to get our parliamentary business
What's the number?
moving forward.
What's the number?
Well, I think it'd be really good to get a majority like we had before, something 20 to 30 upwards. But that's going to be hard work. You know, we've got to make sure we're gaining every single vote tomorrow. every vote matters. We've all seen the polls over the last couple of days that show that there is all to play for everybody, that every vote is going to matter. And as I say, I've seen people win and lose by very small numbers of votes. And we've got to make sure that we get enough people, encourage them to vote Conservative tomorrow so we get a proper working majority, because we are the only party that, looking at all the polls, can actually get a working majority and move us out of this torpid period we've had of hung Parliament, not able to do anything, completely fixed on Brexit and not moving forward. Only a Conservative majority can break through that deadlock and get things done. And to do that, people need to vote tomorrow, and I would encourage people to vote for us, the Conservative Party.
Now, some of my colleagues wanted me to raise a question with you, which is there was some analysis done about which of Boris Johnson's front bench team have been encouraged to do interviews like this one on national television. And I don't know if you're aware, but I think this is probably your 13th or 14th, whereas your boss, Priti Patel, has done almost none. Why do they want you to do so many and Priti Patel so few?
Well, I'm flattered you've added that up, Robert, as information to me. But look, Priti Patel has been absolutely involved with the Prime Minister and myself. We've all been working very diligently on making sure we're putting together a forward-looking immigration policy for the future.
But why has she been so invisible?
Well, actually, I'd say quite the opposite. Priti has been all over the country, working hard with our candidates, talking to regional press as well, to make sure we do everything we can to get as many of our colleagues elected tomorrow as possible, so we can deliver on not just leaving the European Union, but in doing that, having a new immigration system that gives us back control of our borders, something she feels passionate about and has been instrumentally involved in working on over the last few weeks.
Now, just bear me one second, Brad. I'm going to bring in your colleague, John Whittingdale. John, you must have been deeply embarrassed when you saw that little film of, you know, Boris Johnson not looking at that picture of that poor boy in the hospital.
Well, I did hear Boris express great empathy and concern when he learnt the full details of it. But I do think to have a journalist shoving a picture under your nose when you know nothing about the case, you don't know the circumstances.
He must have known about the case, for goodness sake. It had been in the news all morning, overnight.
Well, as I say, as soon as he did discover the detail about it, I mean, he dispatched Matt Hancock to the hospital to find out exactly what had happened. He expressed great sympathy for the family concerned.
Look, I mean, I think the image of the Prime Minister refusing to look at the picture, then taking the phone, putting it in his pocket, you know, that is a symbol of, you know, the cancer of dishonesty, which is casting a shadow over our entire democracy. I mean, we've seen during this campaign, right, a Prime Minister, I mean, locked in a fridge even this morning because he wouldn't face scrutiny. He's repeated, falsehood after falsehood.
Some would say, in terms of a lack of trust, it's not just Boris Johnson. There are lots of people who don't trust your leader for his failure, well, to say, for example, sorry on the Andrew Neil show, for failing to stamp out anti-Semitism.
You mentioned earlier what a disgraceful campaign this has been on all sides, to be honest. It is a kind of a race to the bottom, and I don't think any of us have covered ourselves in huge amounts of glory. Jeremy not apologising isn't good enough, and Boris hiding in a fridge isn't good enough. I mean, you know, we deserve better from our politicians, I'm afraid, and we deserve people to be honest. And some of that spin, you just asked a basic question, why weren't some people put in front of the cameras? Let's be honest. You know, let's not just sort of whitewash everything. Some are better than others, and we're all trying to win, aren't we?
Some are better than others, and I'm delighted we've got the creme de la creme on this programme. I want to say thank you to Brandon. That's it. Tomorrow, I'm counting on all of you to cast your vote to decide whether we're in or out of the EU and what kind of country you want this to be. Next Wednesday, we'll chew over what you've decided. See you then.